Hey everyone, I'm Dan, and this is the Dad Coffee Chat, and I am thrilled to welcome you to the very first episode of the Dad Coffee Chat podcast, where we talk about how to be a supportive partner during pregnancy and postpartum, how to take care of yourself so you can be there for your family, and how to be a dad while excelling in your professional life. And in today's episode, I'm going to be sharing the story of the birth of our oldest son, who was born through a planned home birth. If you're watching or listening to this, my hope is that this story will help you better understand what the reality of a home birth is like. And if you and your partner are considering doing a planned home birth, I hope by hearing our story, you'll have one more resource to help you determine if this is the right choice for you. But before we get started, I need to reiterate the disclaimer that showed at the beginning of this video and share that I am not a medical professional and none of my content should be taken as medical advice. And when considering where to give birth, please consult a licensed provider to evaluate your own situation, medical needs of your partner. And if you'd like more guidance on how to navigate pregnancy, head over to dadcoffeechat.com and check out the Dad's Guide to Pregnancy ebook and our pregnancy mini course. I'll put a link to both of those resources in the description. And lastly, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. It will really help me share this message with others who need it and enable me to help even more dads. All right, so with that, let's jump into one of my favorite stories, our home birth. "I'm pregnant," Kristen screamed as she came out of the bathroom late one evening in April of 2020. After 5 months of trying to conceive, my wife and I's dream of starting a family finally was becoming a reality. Feelings of joy and excitement overcame me immediately, mixed with a bit of anxiety. Are we really ready for this? How will our life change now that we're expecting a child? And what do we need to be doing to prepare financially? These questions raced through my mind as I tried to stay in the moment and be grateful for the joyous news that I'd been wanting to hear for quite some time. Once we found out we were pregnant, it was time to decide where Kristen would give birth. Being a midwife, she always had envisioned a natural birth, whether that took place in a hospital, a birth center, or at home. And working in the hospital as a midwife, Kristen had seen many successful natural birth outcomes, so she was confident that the hospital could be a viable choice for her. Now, the other option, of course, would be to explore the pros and cons of a home birth, which I knew nothing about. Naturally gravitating towards a more conventional route, I advocated for a hospital birth since I had little knowledge of home birth. And in our initial discussions around this topic, Kristen agreed that a hospital birth could be a good choice given her experience and the fact that at the time she was working at the hospital and her fellow midwives and nurses would be there to take care of her. She was confident that her colleagues could provide the birth experience that she wanted, and based on that, we had tentatively decided that we would go down the route of a hospital birth. As we made this decision, Kristen thought it would be good for me to do some reading to get educated on the process, so she ordered We're Pregnant, the First Time Dad's Pregnancy Handbook for me so I could be well equipped with a base level of knowledge as we went through pregnancy. And meanwhile, Kristen decided that she would read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. And with a master's degree and several years of experience, she didn't need any education on childbirth, but she did think it would be a good idea since Ina May is the prominent voice in the midwifery world. So, that brings us to one day in the spring when I was outside doing some yard work while Kristen was sitting by the window reading the book. And as I looked inside from time to time, I could tell that she was very engaged in the content. And after some time, I came inside to get a drink of water. But as I came through the garage door, she stopped me in my tracks and said, "I think I want to do a home birth." The words stopped me in my tracks with my initial response being, "I thought we had decided to do a hospital birth. I'm not sure I feel comfortable about that. Why would you want to do that? Don't you think we'd be putting ourselves and our baby at risk in the event an emergency happened?" And she shared that she was comfortable with birthing in a hospital setting, but after learning more about home birth, she decided that she wanted to look into it more and pleaded with me to open my mind to it. And she reassured me that she would only make the decision if I was 100% on board with it, and her only ask was that I fully consider the option before finalizing our decision. So, knowing that she needed to feel safe and secure wherever she gave birth, I agreed that I would fully consider the possibility of a home birth. I still had a great deal of skepticism, but I knew that this was important to her, so I did my best to have an open mind. So the first step in vetting the possibility of a home birth was to interview a few midwives in town who specialized in home birth. Unfortunately, being in the midwifery community, Kristen knew of a few that we could set up consultation with, which was really helpful. And so to prepare for our meetings, Kristen developed a list of questions, and I also added in a few of my own to help myself be more educated. And if you'd like this list of questions, I've got a link to them in the description, so be sure to check that out. So during our first interview with one of the home birth midwives, we agreed that we enjoyed the conversation, but didn't feel confident moving forward. However, just a few minutes into our meeting with the second midwife, I could already tell that Kristen and her had a really good connection, which immediately engaged my attention. And she was very open to all the questions that I had and did a great job of helping us weigh the pros and cons of a home birth versus a hospital birth. And she also walked us through what a home birth would look like and recommended watching the documentary Why Not Home so we could learn more about home birth before deciding. And even though we would watch the documentary, both of us felt great after our meeting with her. And with the knowledge I was gaining, I had started to come around to the idea of a home birth and felt much more comfortable with that option. So fast forwarding to watching Why Not Home, that was an eye-opening experience for me, to say the least. Now, Kristen had seen childbirth many times, but I had never witnessed it, so watching this documentary was incredibly helpful to prepare myself for what to expect, and it shared a few stories of a few home birth experiences and what advantages there were in comparison to a home birth. And after watching this film and considering our conversation with the midwife and having more discussion with Kristen, we made the decision together to pursue home birth and never look back. In addition to choosing a midwife, Kristen had also wanted to hire a doula who would serve as our birth coach and be a partner for both me and Kristen in the labor process. The great news is that she worked extensively together with someone she knew in many births and had developed a genuine connection, so that's the person we chose. Now, this is a great time to pause the story and share the differences between a midwife and a doula. I see this a lot where the terms get used interchangeably by mistake, so I think it's important to clarify the differences because they are definitely not the same. Now, a midwife is a healthcare professional with medical training who provides comprehensive care throughout pregnancy, labor, and postpartum, including delivering babies. A doula, on the other hand, is a non-medical support person who focuses on providing emotional and physical comfort to the birthing person during labor and delivery without performing any medical procedures. So hopefully that gives you an idea on the differences between a midwife and a doula. So now, back to the story. We're going to fast forward all the way to the end of the pregnancy. Lots happened in between, but we're going to fast forward to the end so we can dive into the actual experience of the home birth. Well, before we knew it, the 36-week mark had rolled around and it was time for our midwife to visit our home and deliver the labor tub and discuss logistics for our home birth. Now, the amazing thing about experiencing this pregnancy with a home birth midwife was that we got to spend considerably more time with our provider than we would have in a hospital setting. This resulted in the ability for me to ask a lot more questions and build a relationship with our midwife throughout the process. And so by the time the home visit came around, it really felt more like I was inviting friends over than our provider. During the home visit, we invited our midwife and a few members of her staff along with our doula over to our home, and we gave them a tour to set it up on a location where we would intend to set up the labor tub and discussed the process. And at this point, our decision to do a home birth really became a reality for me as I set the bag, which held the inflatable labor tub, in our bedroom. Now, throughout the visit, I began to visualize what this experience would look like, starting to envision where the birth would take place, where Kristen would labor, and what I would be doing during the process to support. And after our midwife and her team left, our doula stayed behind and provided some extra coaching for Kristen and I, which was really helpful. Now, during the final days, one thing that Kristen did was eat dates each day. I know that sounds crazy, but we learned that women who eat 5 to 6 dates each day late in pregnancy for a few weeks have a significantly better labor experience, and it was also known to be a labor induction technique. So, knowing and trusting the data, Kristen was religious in eating her dates each and every day. And since they aren't the most delicious fruit, we had to get creative. And one of the ways I did this was to make a smoothie that combined the dates with acai puree, which made for a drink that would be much easier for her to take in. And I'll put the recipe to what I made in the description so you can take a look. Now, leading up to our final midwife appointment, Kristen had been feeling stronger contractions each and every day. And it appeared that eating the dates proved to be an effective technique. So, during one of our last appointments, the midwife evaluated where she was at and determined that we were well on our way to having a baby, possibly as soon as that weekend based on our midwife's assessment, which could not have been more accurate. So Thursday, Friday, and Saturday were days that were all filled with strong contractions, and we knew that labor would be right around the corner, but neither of us expected the pace of events that were about to unfold. On Saturday, Kristen and I decided that we would run some errands to the grocery store, to the pet store, and to Target to pick up some last-minute things. Now, little did we know, these would truly be last-minute runs. And at the last stop, Kristen was not feeling very comfortable, so she decided that she would stay in the car as I went into the various stores with a list of items to pick up. Now, this day was also my mom's birthday, and we had planned to go over to my brother's house to celebrate that evening with our family. So as we were driving home from Target, Kristen experienced a very strong contraction, one that was much different than the others she had up to that point. Now, this prompted me to ask the question as to whether we should attend the party or not. And it was at this time that she was also texting my mother about the birthday. And when she got out her phone to start a new message, another contraction started, and she could even focus enough to get her fingers to type the message. So at this point, I decided it would be best if we stayed home, so I got my phone out, called my mom, and told her we weren't going to make it. When we got home, Kristen started walking laps around the first floor of our house, not really being able to focus much or concentrate much through each contraction. I decided it might be a good idea to time a few contractions to see where things were at. Kristen had a challenging time telling me when they were starting and stopping, so she encouraged me just to follow the breathing. Now, there were a few instances when she was able to inform me when they were happening, but I took her suggestion and sat by her and watched as her breathing took a turn at the start of each contraction, and then a large exhale at the end of each one. After timing 5 or 6, we determined that the contractions were about 3 minutes apart, and so at this point, we decided it would be a good idea to check in with our doula, so I made the initial contact with her. I shared the timing of the contractions as well as how Kristen was feeling at this point, and Kristen had indicated that about 70% of the contractions were very strong and the rest were somewhat mild. Our doula was encouraged and asked if Kristen was up for going for a walk outside, as it was warm enough, even though it was December in Kansas. And Kristen responded that she felt most comfortable walking around the house at this point, so we just decided to stay the course. Since Kristen was in her own world at this point, I decided to do some initial prepping for various scenarios that might take place. So at 5:45 p.m., I put our packed hospital bags in the car in the event that we would need to change plans and head that way. And I also got out some shower curtains that we had bought for the birth and put them below some old sheets on the bed, since we would be using the bed for many parts of labor. About an hour later, I checked in with our doula to see when I should time some more contractions, and she advised that it might be a good idea to observe some over the next 30 minutes or so and see where we were at. I timed 10 of them, and they were about 2 minutes apart on average, and things were definitely starting to progress, so we decided it would be best if we gave our doula a call to explain in more detail where we were at. So the time now was 7:50 p.m., and I started the conversation with a summary of where things were at and shared the timing of the contractions, and during the call, Kristen tried to speak, but during that point, she was interrupted by another contraction. As she made her way through it, our doula and I stopped talking so she could focus. And then we picked up the conversation where we left off, and we agreed that it might be a good idea for us to have some dinner and for Kristen to try to rest on the bed as best she could. Our doula also suggested at this point that it might be good for us to update our team, so I made that call as well. So fast forwarding a little bit to 9:30 p.m., Kristen decided that she wanted to get in our jacuzzi tub for some relaxation and help alleviate some pain, so I started to fill up the tub, put out some candles, and dim the lights to try to create that calming environment. And at this point, The contractions were really starting to get strong and even more painful for Kristen, and to be honest, it was getting challenging for me to watch her in pain, and I wanted to do everything I could to help her, but with her in the tub, there just wasn't much I could physically do to support her through each contraction. Now, about 30 minutes later, I told Kristen that I thought it would be a good idea to call our doula and ask her to come over. And by now, Kristen was having intense contractions, and I was out of my league at this point when it came to knowing what to do, so I felt like it might be a good time to get the extra support in. Our doula ended up arriving about 11:30 at night, and when she came, I led her upstairs to where Kristen was in the tub, and it only took a few contractions for our doula to realize that it would be time for our midwife and her team to come over right away. Now, being a midwife, Kristen was well aware of the labor process and didn't want to call the team too early, as she had been in many scenarios where she had been called too soon and there was not much she could do for her patients besides wait by their side. So one of her biggest fears was that the team would get there and she'd only still be a few centimeters dilated and it would be way too soon. But with the intensity of her contractions, our doula and I both agreed that it would likely not be the case, so we decided that I should make the call to our midwife and share that it would be a good time for her and the team to come over. So while we waited for our midwife and her team to come over, I started blowing up the labor tub and filling it up with water. Now, weeks earlier, I had bought a faucet adapter and a garden hose to use to hook up the faucet and fill up the tub. However, I had not expected that things would progress so quickly, so I was panicking, so I hadn't even take off the packaging for the new garden hose or attach the faucet adapter. I was moving quickly, and so since the process was moving quickly, I got the hose out, screwed the adapter into the faucet, and was trying to do everything I could to get everything prepped. And since I had no experience with this type of procedure, I had a difficult time getting a seal on the faucet. And as a result, the water started spraying everywhere. So my stress level was at an all-time high. But I proceeded to just adjust it until finally the seal was more solid and water was finally flowing into the tub. And I started to take a couple deep breaths and calm down. Our midwife and her team arrived at 12:30 a.m. and they walked upstairs to our master bedroom where the labor tub was being filled up and began to unpack their things. And so first, our midwife assessed Kristen and took her vitals and then had some discussion with her and our doula on how things were going. And shortly after this, everyone agreed it would be helpful for Kristen to get on the bed so our doula and I could come and support her through some comfort measures. So Kristen started by leaning on the birth ball on the bed, and I got behind her and started using the methods that we had practiced for a few weeks. And through our practice, I learned that one of her favorite techniques was hip kneading. So to do this, I made a fist with each hand and used it to knit deeply into her lower back muscles with the flat part of my fist starting near her tailbone and just working my way up. And I slowly started this motion, and Kristen responded with a really big sigh of relief, as this was a signal that it was helping. But then immediately she waved her hands as a motion to both me and our doula to stop touching her as a contraction was starting up again. Now, she had shared before that the birth that this would likely happen, and she would not want anyone touching her during a contraction unless she initiated it. So after the contraction was over, I moved on to another one of her favorite comfort measures, which was the heart back rub. While she was still leaning on the birth ball, I used my hands to trace a heart on her back, starting with the shoulder blades and then moving in that heart motion, ending at the bottom of the spine, and then repeating. And so after a few of these motions, another contraction started, and my hands were off completely. At 1 a.m., Kristen decided she wanted to change positions and lay on the side of our bed. And so I got up on the bed and sat next to her while our doula kneeled next to the floor. And through each contraction, I held her hand as she gripped tighter and tighter, and I could sense the amount of pain that she was in. And I knew that the best thing I could do was be her partner and just hold on to her as she got through the contractions. And in between contractions, our doula applied pressure on her lower back as another comfort measure, which proved to be really helpful. Now, while I couldn't tell how close we were to having a baby, the realization slowly set in over a few hours leading up to this point that likely our baby would be born sometime that morning, and I would need to prepare myself for what would come next. The labor had come on so suddenly and moved so quickly that my adrenaline took over, and all I could think about was supporting Kristen in the moment by moment. But as reality set in, a thought came over me multiple times, and I said to myself, by the time our baby is born, I will have been up for 36 hours. Now, the midwives are going to stay for a few hours, but then we will be taking care of a brand new baby with no sleep, and I will still need to care for Kristen. So my mind started racing. I was like, how am I going to do this? Now, I never said this out loud to anyone, but silently reflected on it in the back of my mind. And even though this was a scary thought, I was confident that my adrenaline would carry me through and that we had 2 sets of grandparents on standby to assist at any point, which also was helpful. Around 3:30 a.m., Kristen decided that she wanted our midwife to check her to see where she was at, and our midwife set up what she needed on our bed and had Kristen lie down on her back, and after a few moments, our midwife said, "You're 9," which meant she was 9 centimeters dilated, and you're going to push out a baby today, she said. And relieved she was 9 centimeters, Kristen felt a burst of encouragement with the affirmation that all the work she had done up to that point had led to good progress. And as a midwife, Kristen had seen too many first-time moms who had made slow progress through labor, even with good contractions, so she was really excited that this was not the case for her. So apparently, eating the dates every day was paying dividends. Now at 5:45 a.m., Kristen was in the labor tub on her hands and knees, continuing to focus on each contraction. Now our midwife student, who was also assisting the birth, attempted to help by applying pressure on Kristen's lower back during each contraction and tried to help push our baby downward and break the water. And after many attempts, this was unsuccessful. Now at this point, since Kristen had a lot of people supporting her, I had gone downstairs for a few minutes to get a drink and a snack. And when I came back up, our doula had informed me that they had a quick conversation about having our midwife manually break Kristen's water. And even though her desire was to have the water broken naturally, Kristen wanted to keep things moving, so she agreed it would be best to have our midwife break the water. So at 6:15 a.m., while Kristen was in the tub, our midwife performed that procedure. With her water broken and her cervix nearly fully dilated, Kristen knew that she was getting close to birth and had another wave of motivation over the next hour, focusing intensely on each contraction, knowing that each one was getting closer and closer to that final stage of pushing our baby out. But then, something unexpected happened. Contractions slowed and everything suddenly stalled. And at this point, after 14 hours of labor, Kristen was exhausted. Going to the hospital was a last resort, but this was the first time Kristen mentioned it as an option. And with an exhausted body, she wasn't sure she'd be able to continue without further interventions. Now, while this was not in her desired birth plan, she was open to the idea. Our midwife checked Kristen again, and they discussed transferring to the hospital and what that might look like. And so Kristen decided she wanted a few minutes to think things over and see what the best decision might be. About 15 minutes later, our baby decided that birthing at home was the optimal choice because Kristen suddenly felt this great urge to push and decided to get back into the labor tub. And Kristen began pushing on her hands and knees in the labor tub, working harder than ever. And periodically, our midwife's assistant would use a Doppler to check our baby's heart rate while Kristen was in the water. And each time the heart rate was strong, which told us that our baby was in great shape. And this continued to give Kristen more and more motivation. Through each push, I was on one side of the tub and our doula would be on the other, with the midwife team huddled on the opposite side of the labor tub with a mirror and flashlight to monitor the progress. And every push, the team continually encouraged her, sharing when they could see significant changes, and occasionally, our baby's hair started making its first appearance. Eventually, Kristen switched positions and sat in the labor tub with her knees bent and sitting up, and at this point, I moved slightly closer to the front of the labor tub where the midwives were so I could see the progress and provide that additional encouragement. So the words I kept using with Kristen is, "You're so strong, and I knew that she needed the affirmation more than ever. Now with each push, I could see more and more of our baby's head coming, and I knew we were close, but since I'd never witnessed childbirth before, I wasn't sure exactly how close we were, so I didn't say anything on the chance that I would provide false hope. Now, when developing our birth plan, one of the components we discussed was having me catch our baby, providing that I was feeling up to it at the time. And as we got closer and closer, I thought about asking if I would be able to catch our baby, but at the same time, I didn't want to interrupt the focus and position that our midwife team had, so I just kept quiet and focused on encouraging Kristen. And after a big push, Kristen said to me, "Are you still going to catch our baby?" And I responded that I would want to, but I didn't want to intervene if it wasn't appropriate. And so I said that to the midwife team. The midwife team gladly supported the idea of me catching the baby and directed me to put my gloves on and allowed me to get into position. And I could tell that we were very, very close and only a few pushes away from our baby being born. And eventually, one of the pushes led to our baby's head coming all the way out, so I put my hands into the tub, placed one hand on the bottom of the head to support it as it came out. And at this point, I was out of my league. And after a few more pushes, the head was completely out and the shoulders were next. And so our midwife briefly took over, pulling the shoulder and arms out and unraveling the umbilical cord, which was around our baby. Now, we tried to put a little bit of humor into this, and since it was close to Christmas, we joked afterward that this was like a Christmas present coming out. Now, once our midwife got the cord unraveled and the entire body out, at 10:07, she handed our beautiful baby to me under the water so I could finally catch it and handed it to Kristen. Tears started flowing down both of our eyes as we looked in amazement as our baby was there. We were so in awe of the moment that we completely forgot to check for the gender since we had not known throughout the process and we kept it a surprise. We lifted the towel wrapped around the baby's body and realized it was a beautiful boy. Now, while Kristen was recovering, I got to hold our son skin to skin for about an hour while Kristen's placenta was delivered. At around noon, our baby had his newborn exam, and he weighed in at 7 pounds, 5 ounces, and he was 21 inches long. And he passed his exam with flying colors, so we were blessed to have a healthy baby boy as an addition to our family. So after the midwives left, and we were finally settled, we made a few FaceTime calls around 1:30 p.m. with our family members to share the good news. And to provide relief, we asked Kristen's parents to come over later that evening so we could rest for a few hours since we had been up for more than 36 hours at that point. While the first night and following days were challenging, we made it through with the support of our family and friends who took care of our son while we got additional rest. And a lot of our friends provided many meals, which was also really helpful. Now, looking back on the birth, Kristen and I asked ourselves the question, if we have another child, would we opt for home birth again? And the answer was an unequivocal yes. The model of midwifery care with a home birth midwife allowed me as a partner to spend additional time during appointments learning about the process and building a relationship with our provider. And this just led to a great experience when it came time for the birth. In addition, the experience allowed us to have complete control on how we wanted the birth and prenatal care to go, which made the experience even more empowering. And finally, arguably the biggest benefit of home birth was that the focus remained on my wife and my son's health from a holistic perspective. And the health of mom and baby was gauged through conversation, observation, and patient-driven interventions, which led to a highly successful outcome and healthy baby boy for our family. It's safe to say that this entire journey was not only eye-opening for Kristen, but life-changing for our family. So that's our home birth story. We love this experience so much that we ended up doing a second home birth and now have 2 beautiful, healthy boys. And maybe someday we'll look forward to another home birth, who knows. Thanks so much for hanging with me through this incredible story. If you liked this video, hit subscribe. It really does help me out a ton. Thanks for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time on the Dad Coffee Chat.